Hello and welcome to TrackVia's Intelligence for Admins. Today we're going to go over flows looping over child records with Derrick and Taylor. We have a few little housekeeping details that we need to do before we get started. So Taylor, if you'll switch that next slide, we'll get everybody going. All right, you are in listen only mode, so please stay in that for everyone to hear the presentation. If you do have a question, absolutely put it in that chat window. We're happy to answer those as we go along, and we'll try to answer as many as we can live. The webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a follow-up email within 48 hours with that recording. That's pretty much it for all of our housekeeping. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Taylor, and have a good webinar.
Excellent, thank you, Michelle. And Derrick, I believe you wanted to run the introduction and agenda today, so I'll let you start.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks everyone for joining our monthly Intelligence for Admins webinar series. I'm Derrick. I run our customer education team. I've got Taylor on the line with us today to talk about a topic that we actually haven't talked about in one of these monthly webinars yet, flows. Really heavily used feature of the TrackVia platform, so excited to bring Taylor in. I'll let Taylor introduce himself here, and then we'll jump into the agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Derrick. Hello, everyone. I'm Taylor Termentozzi. I manage our customer success team. I've been with TrackVia about 6 years now, and this is my first webinar, so thanks for having me, Derrick.
Absolutely. Always good to have you. Taylor's been at TrackVia for a long time. Always love working with you, Taylor, so good to have you here. All right, so let's talk about, let's look at what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to be talking about flows. The first thing we'll do is just get on the same page with what flows are, make sure everyone understands what we're talking about here, what is the feature. And then we'll do a little bit of a deeper explanation into the specific use of flows that we're going to be covering for the rest of the webinar. And that's called looping over child records. It was in the name of the webinar, that's why we're all here. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We'll talk about what that is, what it looks like. We'll also look at some examples of when you might want to do that, when you might want to use that functionality in behavioral flows. And then we'll do a demo. So as we always do on these webinars, Taylor will bring us into TrackVia, and we'll get to see a live use case of the looping through child records behavior and walk us through how to set it up. And then we'll just kind of wrap things up with some questions, some takeaways, and some additional information at the end. Now, what we're going to do here is something similar to what we did on the last webinar, okay? If you could, please use the chat feature to chat through any questions that you may have as we go through, but also we would love to hear how you're using the flows feature in your accounts today, okay? Whether you have a unique use for the flows feature or you know, it's something that you do in several different applications, we would love to see those ideas. And if you chat them through at the end of the webinar, we're going to go through and we're going to call out what some of those ideas are. We'll talk about them. This way we can all learn from each other, right? We can all see how everybody else is learning or using flows, and we can get some new ideas, hopefully to improve our applications. So we'll also choose a couple of folks at the end of the webinar that have participated to send t-shirts to. So we sent out a couple on the last webinar. I hope you got those, and I hope you like them. They're really soft, they're good quality t-shirts. So participate, and maybe you'll get chosen, and we'll send you some t-shirts. All right, so let's get to the flow stuff. All right, what is a flow? Let's start there. Now, in TrackVia, we build tables and we put records into those tables, right? We put data in those tables. And we create forms and nice views and charts that we want our end users to interact with. Now, without the flows feature, if a user is interacting with the application that you've built, there's some level of knowledge that they have to have about the way the application is architected in order to navigate around to get where they want to go, okay? The flows feature is meant to make that a lot simpler. The idea is we can use a flow to connect those resources that we've built for our end users to navigate them automatically from one to the other. So within a flow, you could attach, one form to another form to a view, and they can just click a next button to go from one of those resources to the next. Makes navigation really, really easy for the end users. Kind of takes away that, call it, cognitive overhead that's just built into using the platform. Okay, so that flows feature allows us to do that. Now, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, and let's talk about a specific use case for flows, or a behavior that we can produce using the flows feature is a better way to say that, okay? It's called looping over child records. Now, in order to design this behavior within your applications, you need to have a specific setup, okay? And when I say setup, I mean a table structure setup, okay? And that table structure is what you can see here. It's a parent-child relationship. So you can see there's an example here on the left. A project can have many tasks. Okay, it's a very standard type of relationship. I'd say 99% of all applications have a parent and child relationship somewhere in them. Okay, as an example, we can imagine that let's say we're a company that puts stickers on cars for marketing purposes, right? Wraps on cars. An example of a project might be to apply that wrap to the car. And then there are multiple tasks that need to get completed for that project. You need to put the sticker, the wrap on the right side, on the top, on the rear, on the left, right? You need to do several different things. Now, if we're using TrackVia to track the completion of those tasks for quality control, and we want our technicians to take a picture of every side of the car that they put the wrap on, we'd end up with a scenario like this, where you have a project and multiple tasks layered under that where we want them to upload a picture. Now, with the flows feature, we can design this experience so that they go into the project and the flow will actually direct them to the first task in a form, right? Like you see here on the screen, it's task number 5. We have to take a picture of the top of the car. We upload the image, and then we click the next picture button in the upper right. That takes us to the right side of the car where we attach an image, and then we click next picture, and that takes us to the rear of the car where we need to take the picture, and then click the next button. So that sequence of looping through those child records just by clicking that button in the upper right hand corner for next picture is the exact behavior that we're talking about here. It's looping over a set of records. So common examples of when you might want to do this, there's actually a lot of examples for customers for use cases of when you might create a looping scenario like this in a flow. Quality control questions, checklists, and surveys, the first 3 that we have listed here, they're all very similar in the fact that you want the end user to answer a bunch of questions. Right now, you could have a form with 50 or 100 questions on it, or you could design your app that way. Or maybe a more elegant way to do it is to have multiple records where each question is a record, and you use a flow to loop through each question so that they answer them. Right? So checklists, surveys, quality control type use cases all have a lot of places where you're answering multiple questions in a row. Inventory management systems. If you have a pick list of items that you need to go out to the warehouse and grab, you can use a looping flow to, bring up the next item you need to go pick. And then, the person can go pick it off the shelf, type in the quantity, and then hit the next item. So then they go pick the next item, right? You can also do, if you are placing orders for your customers and they're ordering a couple of different things at a time, right? You can use a looping flow to go through each of the line items that they've ordered and fill out information. And then of course the task completion, which is kind of like what we just saw here with the car wraps. Somebody's out in the field, they have to do something or a few things, and you want them to fill out information about each thing that they're doing. Great use case for looping flows over child records. Okay. So there's some common examples of when you might use this type of behavior. So I'll stop talking now. Hopefully that sets the scene well, and we'll turn things over to Taylor here, who's actually going to go into TrackVia, show us an example, a real live example, and show us how to set it up. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you, Derrick. Yes, I'll take over for the demo here. And I think one thing that's important on top of Derrick's examples is Flow's ability to be beneficial on a mobile device. How, users out in the warehouse, users out in the field, flows are helpful that I can see everything on full screen, the individual tasks that I'm assigned to right now. And when I finish, it's going to loop me through what's next. And when I'm all done, that brings me back to my dashboard. It's extremely beneficial in that way for navigation on the mobile device.
Good point.
Okay, all right. So to prove out this use case for flows and really let this sink home for everyone watching today, I've built a demo around sort of a daily operation for someone in the human resources department. And what they're going to do is log an event with an employee, and we'll go through the different event types, and then that human resources representative, they're going to be faced with a series of tasks that are required by management to be answered or to be completed for that specific event type. And as I'm going to start out here on my dashboard, I'm going to drive through my flow button here for a new event. And the events I'm going to list here is if it's a new hire, someone new to the organization, someone's being terminated, or someone's receiving a promotion. Populate a few details here, and I will advance. And what I like to do, it's a personal preference for me at TrackVia to use flows, but before I deep dive into the flow and the tasks that I'm about to start, I like to see all of the tasks that I have. It gives me an idea of how much time commitment, can I do this before my lunch break? Right, just some considerations to take. And I'll say this because I would ask the same thing is, okay, why would I use a flow for this when I can just answer these tasks or these questions? You can, absolutely. There's no problem with that, and that won't disrupt your flow. Again, like we said, this is great for your mobile use case. This is, if there's a lot of information to be displayed on your screen, you might want to see these individual tasks shown up close, right? Maybe there's image supplements for what needs to happen or directions. Several different reasons why you would want these tasks full screen. So I'm going to follow my flows button, and I'm going to start my questions. And you'll notice there's an order here that my flow is following: security, email, and then enter into an HR system. Pretty light use case, but you'll get the point here. So I'm just responding if it's yes, it's completed. Maybe that's a response, or maybe that's a status. Yes. And if I want to go through my next question, there's the email access. Yes, as well. I finished that task. Last one, I've entered in HR, right? We followed that order. And what we're going to do is the system of looping through the child records, it says, okay, there was 3 tasks in total. I'm going to go through each individual task. And then when I'm completed, I come right back to where I started. As Derrick mentioned, like cognitive overhead, if I'm brand new to the job, I can come in and walk through that, right? I don't have to go to any place special within my systems internally. I don't have to know which questions I'm supposed to ask or what tasks I'm supposed to do for different event types. Right, brings me right back to my homepage. And what we're going to do next is I'm going to show the setup, like how is this put together, make sure that everyone knows there's no magic taking place, right? This is a live demo, as we like to roll the dice. And what I'll show next for the admins out there is, everyone always asks, show me the ERD. So here we are. And the two table interactions that you just saw is that there was an HR event and then there was questions that I had to respond to. That's the parent and child that Derrick referenced in his sort of prerequisite slide. And what I like to do is also link the questions back to a database. And main reason being is reporting. I want to see how often this is completed. How many times have we had to ask this specific question or do this specific task? And I can build some management reporting on top of the layer that the business is really handling. That gives me some additional analytics to look at. And what's important here is in this question database, I can describe, I can control what's being asked and when is it like active, is always making sure that the questions that are being asked for different event types are up to date, right? If I'm keeping a spreadsheet and every time a new event happens without this flows use case, right, I'm making a copy of a parent spreadsheet, right? There's a master stored somewhere in my company. I copy it for every new employee and then I store that somewhere. What this question database does is allow me to, one, populate the questions. I can import this in, and that makes it very easy. And then for each event type here, if I no longer, we're all working remotely now, we don't need security badges anymore. If I mark that as inactive, it's not going to ask that for future employees. Okay, and then what we'll do now is I'm going to show you a little bit of what's already created. There's, hey, how did those questions get automatically populated? How does that work? I'm going to walk you through that now. So where an app script exists and won't be the main point of today, but is certainly necessary for this to be developed for your own use cases, is a small amount here, and I'll zoom in here, but we're happy to share this. This is fairly light in what it's doing, but it's instrumental for the setup. Real quickly, just make sure I have an event type. That's important. And then what we do is we use our find function, our app script, to look at our question database and match on the event type. I can match on more criteria than that. I didn't include the active identifier here, but I could check the multiple conditions in my app script. So if I go off and I find 3 event type questions for a new hire, each function is just going to add those questions, a copy of them really, to be answered. So in my question database, I'm not looking for answers there. In my question response table, that's where I'm recording the answers on each particular event. Derrick, anything you want me to add before I jump into the new example here?
No, this is good. Just one thing I do want to say is you don't need an app script to get the looping through child records behavior to work. This app script here is for the added ability to auto-generate questions, which is what you're seeing in Taylor's demo behavior. But you could certainly have questions pre-populated and not use an app script like this. But yeah, the app script does make it much more flexible. Yep.
Great point. Thanks, Derrick. Okay, so to prove that this works, what I'm going to do is demonstrate this live with a new walkthrough of building this for a different use case, right? Just prove to you that it works. What I did was I copied the HR events table and I copied the question response table before this. A lot of people don't know the copy table feature exists. Highly recommend it. So what we'll do now is build the formulas required to handle how does my flow figure out which task am I supposed to do next, and like how do I control that with a flow. So I'm going to jump into a new use case for it's a project in the project tasks. Well, a lot of times I see this in clients, it's just kind of a recipe that they repeat in different applications, right? If it's, no matter what it is, if you have to respond to a task or a question and there's some sort of master list, this is applicable. Okay, so in the prerequisite here, I just copied over, when I copied this table, I pre-built this app script again, because that's not the use case of this webinar today, but just letting you know that it does exist. So what we'll do is we're going to start out in our child table. And what we need to do here is we need to add a few one calculated and one triggered fields to handle the flow logic. And the first field that I'm going to add here is it's going to be a triggered number, and I am going to call this if answered. What that really means is this task been completed or not? And I'm going to copy this over just for sake of time here. But what we're looking at is if this status, right, it's a different response type for a task. It's not a completion, it's a status, or it's not a response, it's a status. It can either be completed or it's not applicable. So I want to look and say if I do not have my status populated, I want this field to show me the order, right? The order being the sequence in which the events are supposed to be shown to the individual going through the flow. And if the status field is populated, I want a null value to be shown, right? Nothing, completely blank. And then I'm going to use a calculated text field. And this can be used in different ways, but how I like to use this is it's a very clear indicator if the task that I'm on in my flow is supposed to be displayed or not. I need to put a placeholder here because in my setup, I have to go up to the parent table, my flows project, and I need to build another calculation that's going to be needed for this field. So I'm going to go ahead and save. Then I'll navigate up to my flows project table. Okay, and two things here. Again, I'm going to add a triggered field, this time a triggered number, and a calculated number field. And the first thing for my triggered number is I'm going to use a calculation. I want to count the number of unanswered questions. This gives me some logic to say how many questions in total is there, then how many do I have left to respond? Again, that'll go into our logic for our flow. And I'm going to copy this as well. And again, it's a count of that if unanswered field. So how many have not been answered or don't have a status yet? Next is I'm going to use a field, and I'm going to call this next record. And this uses a different function, which is why we need a calculated number here type of fields. And I'm looking at the minimum task that's related to this project that is not answered yet. And we're going to save, and I'll return back to my flows project tasks. And what I'm looking at here is I'm going to say if the order value of this task for this project is identical to the minimum task that's not answered's order. We'll take a second to digest that, but basically, one project, I have 5 tasks. After I answer the first task, now task number 2 is the lowest sequence of events that I need to interact with next. So number 2 being it's the first one that's not answered, that task is the next task to be addressed. Okay, so now that we've had the 2 calculations in project tasks, 2 calculations in the projects table, now we are ready to build out our view and our form that are necessary for this flow to be built properly. And what we'll do here is on our child form, we have a form that's built, and right, this will take us through as my demonstration had. It's popping up full screen. Hey, what do I need to answer right now? What we will add to this form is a helper function for our flow, and I'm going to add a new field section. And what I am adding here is I'm going to add the field sum of unanswered questions from my parent table. That's my project, right? Project and tasks. So what we'll do here is it's a helper, but it's in no way important to the end user going through the individual tasks. So a little trick here that I'll show you is we're hiding a section, this text, this field section, and a handy little trick is when we want to show this field section is when the question is identical to that little secret, which, hey, that should never happen. And the purpose there is we never want that to be shown. It's not necessary. So we've created that.
So before you move on, this is super cool, and we do this. I think we do this a lot. What's kind of happening here is, right, Taylor is getting everything ready for the flow, right? We've added the calculations we need for the flow. Now he's editing the forms and adding the things to the forms that we need for the flow, and I'll do the same with the views. For this particular one, sometimes you need a field on a form to be used for some piece of logic, like logic in a flow or a show hide rule or something. And it needs to be on the form, but you don't want the end users to see that field. And that's what Taylor is doing here is he's putting the field on the form, but like basically always hiding it. There's a lot of uses for this, and it's really cool. And this is a great way to do it. So yeah, thanks for showing this, Taylor, because I think that's in and of itself is a great tip.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got one more housekeeping item to build in our prerequisites for the flow to work properly. So now that that's been added, I'm a pro, so I'm going to do this in advance. Right, when you're building a flow out, there's a lot of times you're like, I forgot to add this resource. I need to save my flow and go back in, or something's not working right. Let me address that. This demo will hopefully will go smooth with building this out, but right, that's part of TrackVia. It's very easy to build and edit and change. So, in your flows, that's just going to happen. So in that I know how this flow is supposed to work in the prerequisites, what I need to build here is a new view that's going to help my flow decide, hey, what task am I supposed to pick up next? And don't make my end user select which task to pop up in their flow. There's a lot of use cases for that. When the sequence doesn't matter, they can select which task they want to do, and that is perfectly fine, just not the demo for today. All right, so the view that's going to help us here is called is next record. I don't have to add or remove any fields from this view. What I do need though is to build a new filter, and the field that I'm going to use here is the next record for flow is identical to yes, right? So that is the calculated field that I built into my project task table that just gives me a yes or no answer. So for here, it's just yes. And to answer a question that you might be having, well, how's this view going to know which project I'm on and show me the right task? Great question. We're going to answer that in our flows. So that is the last item that I need to take care of before I can build my flow. And I will do so now. So brand new flow, new projects. And how I want my flow to work is they're going to add the project in this flow, right? It's in this example, it's very start to finish, happens at one time. Again, different use cases. You might have your superintendent makes your projects, and the project manager comes in and picks up a project and works through your tasks. What I want to do here is I'm going to add a new project. It's an add task type, and I'm going to use my form for adding a project. And we'll say next. And what you can do here, like I mentioned when I demoed the HR flow, is you could just add a project and jump right into the tasks. I like that this extra step that you can add in that shows you all of the tasks that you're about to engage in, and kind of just give you an idea if you want to do that right now or not. Hey, it's almost Thanksgiving. Maybe we're cutting out early. So to build that into our flows, the step here is I actually am going to have a view task that follows my add task. And what it's going to do is it's going to pick up the project that we just added. And we'll use that using a variable and the record ID of the previous step. So we add it, we click next, the flows picks up that same project, and then it's going to show an edit form for me with all of the tasks that were just auto-generated via my app script. So this is let's call this our review project step. Let me zoom in a little so everyone can see the right-hand menu. All right, it's an edit. I'm going to use my flows project edit form, and this label is going to be called begin tasks. Okay, so next up, we are going to have a view task, and we're going to call this our auto select next task. And this will be a view step. And the view that we just built, right, that I had a small filter on is next record. We're going to use that view. And we'll use this variable method, right? So what this will do for us is it's going to say, for this project, there can only ever be one next record that needs to take place for this project. And so there's only going to be one record in there per project. And that's what kind of auto selects the next task for us here. We can use the record ID from the previous step. And if there isn't any, someone didn't generate them, right? This extra setting in our flows now. If there's no task there, it's just going to kick them out. If there's nothing for you to do here, we leave. what we'll do is, what we want to do is once that task is selected, we want to update the status of that task. And I'm going to use my form for my tasks view and edit. And we'll leave our default labels here. Next up is we have a decision step. And the decision steps, a lot of what I've built in my calculations for my project and my task table, this is when these decision steps are really helpful, right? It gives me a way to determine what to do next instead of, hey, you're a first-time flow user, you're going start to end. There's not a lot of decisions to be made. It's just very linear. What I want to do is build up first this new decision. I'm going to have this loop back and look at if there is any more questions. It's going to loop back to this auto select next task. And if there isn't any questions or tasks to be answered, then we're just going to kick right out. Okay, so now we're going to use the decision's results to say when do we do each, like when should we take path A versus path B? And what I'll do is first, it will be next question. And if there is nothing, we will exit. And let's just leave that off. Okay, so for the next question, and this is where that form, that hidden value comes into play, is I want to find my review project, or actually this update, from this update status step, the flows project tasks view or edit form. This is that value, some of unanswered questions that the end user shouldn't see, but is going to determine in my condition step what to do next. So what we'll use here is if we have one or more unanswered questions, we're going to loop back through. And in our flows, the exit step also needs to have a condition. So I'm going to repeat the same thing. If you use the same field, it's a little more binary if it's yes or no. All right, and the sum of unanswered questions is less than 1 or equal to 0. Same thing here. And then we'll just exit. So let's look at my flow step. All right, I've added, it's more questions. There's none left. Okay, I think I'm all set. So I built my flow. I had all my prerequisites finished ahead of time. Like I said, that doesn't always happen. So revisit your flow and make your updates as needed. So now what we want to do is I'm going to build out a new dashboard so I have a place to put my flow and test it. My project headquarters, add my new projects flow button, and then I'm going to use a view that kind of just helps us determine, just to show on screen like, hey, this is actually happening. Okay, so we'll start here, and I think it's worth mentioning in my question database. So I have one place that's handling all of my questions, could be separate, but I've already added 2 project type events for creating a statement of work and complete the contract sign off. So when I go through my new projects, this is going to start on the 29th. Flows, demo, loops. My project type is pre-selected. Right, here's you see that small flash, and that small flash in your flows is that auto select of the project that we just added. I can see my order's been populated. I can see my questions here, and I'm going to use my flow button to begin my tasks. And right, we have that section hidden, not necessary. This task has been completed. And next, we have the contract sign off. Last question. And there we go. New project has been added and is completed. And we're brought back right out to our dashboard to start all over again. Derrick, anything you want to say or want me to review for the flow I just built?
I thought, no, I think I'm glad it worked. I was crossing my fingers. Just kidding. No, I think that was a good overview. We can give everyone a moment here to ask some questions. I see 2 questions that have come through, 3 questions that have come through so far, but if folks want to see anything else before we kind of get out of the demo phase here, now's your time to ask those questions. One thing I will address here is that there's a question about how you could just open that form, right, for the project and then fill out the child records directly in that parent project form. Yes, you can do that, but sometimes you actually gain a lot from going into each child. Remember, there's a lot of features that exist within a form. So if you open up each record, then you can use show hide rules, you can use dependent drop down fields, requirements, right? There's a lot of things that, a lot of benefit that you get from going into each record. That's essentially a reason why you might want to consider this.
Yeah, and Derrick, I'll add on to that
Yep.
response to the question. And yeah, if I have, let's say for each question that I have in my project, let's say you have an image or a documentation supplement to that question. It's not easy, like create my SOW. When my question database populates questions, right, maybe on this form, as Derrick mentioned, I have an image or I have a template of this SOW stored here, right? And yes, you could download it from the parent form, but if you have images here, right, it's up in full screen, and there's more ways to utilize the form, same as Derrick mentioned.
Totally. Okay. So I see a couple more questions. Let's flip over to the key takeaways. We'll get some questions answered, and then we'll share everyone's flow examples, which are awesome. A bunch came through. Remember, there's still time to get your flow examples in as well. All right. So key takeaways. First is that you can pair this behavior with app scripts. So that's what Taylor showed us today. It was paired with an app script that auto generates the questions. By all means, not necessary, but does help in a lot of circumstances to auto generate tasks or questions or line items or whatever it may be on the fly. What else do we have? A series of formulas are necessary to loop over child records. So we saw Taylor create 4 formulas today. These formulas drive the logic of the flow. Really what they're trying to do, or what they show us, what they show the flow, is how many child records there are that need to be looped over, and which one of them is the next one that we want to loop over. So that order, is it the first one, is it the second one, is it the third one? So that's the 2 things those formulas are doing. How many tasks are left, and what's the next task or child record. You need to create all the resources before you create the flow, right? So we saw Taylor do the views and the forms and the formulas, then created the flow. That's how you create flows in TrackVia. You get all the resources squared away, and then you create the flow. And like Taylor said, he's an expert, so he knew what to create ahead of time. But if you're working on your flow and you forget, it's fine. You go back, you create the resource, then you come back to the flow builder. And then the last one is that this works really well on mobile. If some of you are familiar with mobile, you may know that child views on mobile work differently than child views on the web. So on the web, you could pull up a project and see the three child tasks there all on the same page. On mobile, you can't really see those tasks and in-cell edit them. So actually, this looping through child records is a huge driver if you're using mobile devices. Okay.
Hey, Derrick,
Yep.
I think on one of these key takeaways with the question that came in is, does flows and looping through child records work offline? I wanted to see if you would like to answer that or want me to.
Sure, yeah, I saw that come through. That's Carlos. Thanks for joining, as always, Carlos. Yes, flows do work offline, okay? There are a couple of nuances. You always want to make sure you build the flow and then you test it, because there are certain features, though, that do not work offline, like app scripts. So what Taylor showed here today, where it auto-generates the questions, that would not work offline. So the basic question of, do flows work offline? Absolutely. However, there are some things that may not, and it's good to make sure that you test the functionality before you roll it out, of course. And then the other question, Carlos, that was the second part of that, was what happens if a flow gets interrupted and they need to leave, or their app crashes? Hopefully the app doesn't crash. We try to think, we tend to think our app is pretty stable, but it can happen. And if it does, then yes, your end user or the data may be left in an incomplete state. And that all depends on how you construct the flow. So you could have it, right? So then if the user leaves the flow prematurely, or they do just leave in the middle of it, you absolutely can design it in such a way that they can just restart it and pull up the project again, and then it's looping through the remaining tasks. So that is certainly possible. Every time you click that next button in the upper right corner of the flow, it saves your work and then moves you to the next step. So if you then, your phone dies or whatever it might be, yes, you could go back in that next step. The previous steps would have been saved. All right, so that was a great segue into questions. Let's see what other questions that we have coming through here. Michael, how hard is it to add an extra an exit point without completing all the tasks and a way to jump back in? Does it actually work that way in what you designed today, Taylor? It may.
Yeah, you can exit at any time, and I think this relates exactly to Carlos's question, like what happens if you abandon a flow too early? So let me loop you halfway through this. All right, so we added a project, it shows here, and then I begin my tasks. If I just leave right now, what's going to happen is it allows me to leave, that project still exists. The project doesn't have any statuses, meaning they're unanswered. How I generally would handle this is I would have two flows. There's one for adding new projects, because it's all about these first steps. This first step is it's an add task, and then it auto selects it and moves through. What you can have is build a view called projects with open tasks, and it is, only thing it has to look at is show me all the projects where the unanswered questions I have is greater than 0. And this one is a triggered field, so it wants me to like react with it first, but let me show you this. Okay, so this test project has 2 unanswered tasks. So if I built a view that was only those tasks, or only those projects with open tasks, my flow will let me click an existing project, and then the flow would continue with, hey, I have an unanswered task, and loop until it's completed. So really the answer there for Michael and Carlos is yes, if you abandon, you come back from lunch, it's going to pick up with the next task that's unanswered, as long as my flow is built out to have a different starting point.
Yep.
Another question, and I kind of put this Easter egg in here, Michael, so thanks for calling this out, and if anyone else did as well. Hey, you see a lot going on this dashboard here. A couple things is, on this dashboard, we're adding some helper functions. There is a dashboard widget here that it's a great place to put instructions. And then I also put a link to our TrackVia University website here. So I can search live, and this is using the website, right? It's just iframed in here. That works there. And what I put in here under my widgets is a web link, and I have this pointing out to Google, so it's a little bit of, let me Google that for you. How we use this internally is it's linked back to a company document where we keep documentation. And yeah, that's probably Derrick, you think that's the best way we're using that, or you've seen that?
Yeah, you could link to anything really, internal, intranet, PDF documents hosted on a internal drive somewhere. Yeah, so it looks like a flow, but it's actually a link to another website, or Google in this case. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I think maybe one's coming through now, but let's move on to the examples of how folks are using their flows, just so we can all learn. How are other people using flows? So we have from Stephanie. She uses flows to force users to create specific records on separate tables in a specific order. That's great, right? So rather than the end user having to navigate to one table and then go find another table and then go find another table, the flow can just have them add records in a sequence to all the different tables. That's great. Linda, we've got entering a promotion or a market adjustment for approval. So that's two different types of things that somebody could add to the system, and the flow would route them through different paths. So using the decision to go one way versus another way in the flow based on what they're entering. Is it a promotion or is it a market adjustment? So that's great. Michael, let's see, adding parent record and associated child records. That's one of the classic examples of using a flow. Add a parent and then add multiple children to that parent. Jason says they use flows for a lot of things, but some of them are time tracking flows. So clocking in and out of a job site or a project, whatever it might be. This is really cool, Jason. It looks like you have a pin. So maybe that user enters a pin and hits clock in, or enters a pin and hits clock out, and it captures how long they were on the job for. Great use for flows. Another Michael here. Got a lot of Michaels. Let's see. Bring the users to an assessment form or an opportunity, so that they can mark it as complete and then it disappears from their dashboards. Or if it's unfinished, it stays there so they can come back later and finish it. So that's kind of what Taylor was walking us through. A flow to either complete something or halfway complete something and then come back later and complete it. Am I missing any?
No, I think there's the great point from Linda there is, right, like I can use, I used it wasn't quite linear, but yeah, I have a parent and child flow here. Yeah, another way you could build this is if I have a button like start something, and it does link me to different tables. And if I say start and it's a project, it goes to my projects table. If it's an HR event, it goes to a different table. And I can have just these parallel lines in my flow that all have different tables. That's all based off of a condition super early on that's a drop down or even something that someone selects purposefully.
Awesome. Okay, let's go ahead and just wrap things up here. I don't think I see any other questions coming in. All right, so we covered a lot today, to be honest, right? Touched a lot of pieces of TrackVia, right? Tables with calculations, forms, views, show hide rules, and then of course flows, even a little bit of app scripts. So if you want to learn more about those features, of course, there's the on-demand courses on the TrackVia University website that you can go and watch. Or check out any of our knowledge base articles on our knowledge base, okay? If you have more specific questions that you can't find the answer to in the self-serve resources, of course, you have access to support. Just give them an email or give them a call. They're always there to help you. Professional services, right? If you have something more complex, something that's going to take a little bit longer to set up, we're always there to help you too. Right, so we have many different ways that you can get help from us. So don't feel like you're on your own. We've got the professional services to help with more complex things as well. And then our next webinar, we're going to skip December, holiday season. So we're not going to do one in December. So our next Intelligence for Admins webinar is going to be in January. Topic TBD. Be on the lookout for that, but it'll be at the end of January. And then, of course, last piece, you'll get a little questionnaire at the end of this webinar. If you could just answer it, takes a minute, that'd be excellent, help us improve, and we'll send you the recording soon. So we're about at the top of the hour. Thank you, Taylor, so much for joining and showing us how to use this cool behavior that you can build into your flows. And thanks everyone for joining our monthly webinar, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks everyone.